What we're now seeing is, for the very first time, attempts to make it illegal to do business if you don't have a minimum BEE score.
Like economic empowerment, it is something that makes politicians very rich. But is it something that prevents whites from entering the economy? Well, based on a few decisions of the past few days, it looks like it is exactly what the government wants to do.
Let us not forget that the struggle against apartheid was a struggle of the black majority trying to be involved in the economy at large. Remember, this was them being excluded from the economy so that they wanted equal footing with their white counterparts. But it would seem in modern South Africa that the white counterparts are not afforded the same rights as the black majority. In many respects, what this is showing us is that the ANC never actually had a problem with apartheid. They were more than happy for there to be apartheid. They just had an issue with who was managing it. They were quite happy to see the roles reversed. You may say, well, why is this? Well, it would appear that the ANC's property regulator has now come out and basically said, well, if you're not complying with BEE, we won't let you be an estate agent.
That's correct. And it's not only to be an estate agent, they're basically saying having a fidelity certificate, which is the license to be part of this property industry, that certificate is now going to be based on your BEE status. So you need to be at least level 8 BEE or 40% BEE. And if you don't do that, when renewing your Fidelity Fund certificate, you can't practice to be an estate agent or property developer or bond originator or any of these wonderful things that, people do in the property sector. So BEE before was always a little bit like, if you want to do work with the state or you want to do work with corporates, which was bad enough. But now the stage 3 BEE is now prohibiting people from actually entering the economy in the industry that they choose due to these licensing requirements. This is a very, very nefarious turn.
So, for those of you who don't know, the BEE scorecard is made up of a number of things. It is not as straightforward. We cannot just say to you, well, what you actually need is you need black ownership or black participation or whatever. It's actually a very complicated thing. To give you an idea, a scorecard could be made up of things such as ownership, management control, employment equity, so how many, bean countering you do, forms of skill developments, do you take on apprentices, preferential procurement, we've seen the president loves to talk about that, local procurement, enterprise developments, in other words, are you actually helping your competitors grow, the black competitor down the road that is going to dwarf your business in time because they don't have to be. Anyway, socio-economical development. Are you giving money to the poor? There are a number of factors that can go into a scorecard. But that in itself is problematic because the actual scorecard itself, being highly technical, very complicated, actually costs a lot of money to implement for the business. So if you're a smaller firm and you do relatively well, you're going to spend a significant amount of your turnover just trying to comply with the rules, trying to actually get the scorecard to where you want it to be, which inevitably adds an impediment to you operating your business. And that in itself is where this all becomes tricky, because Scorecard says that what they see this as doing is actually entirely disrupting the business industry when it comes through to property. What it will effectively do is it will look good on paper, saying, oh, look, what we're trying to do is get more black participation, but what it will actually do is cripple the sector. And as Scorecard rightly points out, if that's what you're trying to do, it'd be far more effective to you to not waste the money on these scorecards, if you will, but rather just ban white people from being involved in estate agents. You'd basically get the same results and it would be a lot cheaper.
Absolutely. And of the 40,000 certificates in the property sector, 30,000 are to white people or white firms. But quite a lot of those firms are, family businesses and things like that. But if you want to reflect the demographics of the country, which is a favorite term of this government, in every industry around the country, you can't have 60% of the industry being white-owned. You need only 10% of the industry to be white-owned. So it is much easier just to ban people, white people specifically, from that industry through these various cumbersome licensing regulations like BE, for example. So you've got a small firm with maybe it's a family business of 2 or 3 people, and now they need to hire consultants to figure out how to get to level 8 BE and who which property other people to support and which charity to give to and which person to bring into the business. I mean, this is all very disruptive. It's a small family business. easiest option is to just close up shop, which I think is what the ANC wants, really.
Yes, to a large degree, that is kind of what they want. And so Sakalika has rightly come out and said, let's look at the actual rules and say what exactly is wrong with them, if you will. So the first is that, as they rightly point out, the regulations which the regulator attempts to adopt, they're not allowed to. So the actual regulations, the Act of Parliament, which allows the regulator to do their licensing remit, says that a BEE scorecard must be provided, but doesn't say to what level it has to meet. So actually a nil scorecard would still be relevant. The regulators now done is they've gone one step further and actually mandated how much of a scorecard you need to meet. The second is that there's this requirement for a fidelity fund, which Sakalika argues is unconstitutional, because effectively what it does is it bars certain individuals from actually going out there and participating in the sector of the economy that they choose. In other words, if you can't comply with the needs, the certificate requirements, then all of a sudden you're actually barred from choosing the job that you want to do, which is directly unconstitutional. The last thing that Sakalika, and the most concerning point that Sakalika highlights, is that before this change was implemented, and this change wasn't really implemented with any real public participation or any input from anybody else. It was just announced in a webinar because reasons. And what Sakalika highlights is that before that was done, they actually changed the definition of a state agent. So what is now covered underneath the definition of a state agent is actually very wide. It includes property developers, managing agents, bond originators. The sector which it encompasses, where this Fidelity Fund certificate applies, is huge. So do not underestimate the economic impact of these supposed legislative changes, which certainly could argue they're not allowed to do anyway.
Indeed, at the end of the day, if you make it very difficult for a certain sector of your society to trade or to do business or to make money, it's called expropriation. As simple as that. In the past, governments used much cruder ways of doing so, like sort of, banning Jews in Nazi Germany from trading and various other things in our country as well, banning black people from participating in the economy in various areas of this country. If you make it really difficult for a certain sector of your society to make money, to partake in the economy, it is a form of expropriating their wealth. It is a form of social engineering. And this is exactly what the ANC wants. The third wave BEE is now going to include this, what we're talking about at the moment, but who knows in the future? Do you maybe need to be BEE just to start a company one day, to register a new PTY at the CIPC, to get a tax number? Do you need to be BEE compliant then? This is not happening now, but this is the steps required to make those requirements something real in the future.
Now, you may look at all of this and say, okay, ultimately, what does this mean? And actually, Ramon, I've got something to highlight to you, and that is actually the CEO of Sibanye Stillwater came out today and basically said, well, what South Africa desperately needs is new leadership. It needs leadership that wants to be business friendly. It wants to have private sector involvement, because under the current regime, that's not what they want. They want central command and they want to tell everybody what to do. And as he highlights, in his industry, which is the mining sector, there are constantly threats. He says the threats are either expropriation without compensation, nationalization of the mines, or it could even be exploitative licensing systems. Sound familiar to the property sector. And what he says is what this inevitably does is it means that investors are unwilling to invest in South Africa. He said, I quote, investment is on strike. He says this is contrary to what Cyril Ramaphosa says, because investments flowing into the economy are not keen to come into an economy that's highly regulated. Many people highlight that in Africa, the economic plight all over the continent is because of, colonial practices and blah, 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 whatever else. What a lot of people are unwilling to highlight is that the biggest impediment to business in Africa is state licensing. It is state control. We are the most highly regulated continent on the planet. If you put these impediments to business, business will not thrive. And lo and behold, it's exactly what's happening in Africa. Business does not survive here.
Oh, the only business that do survive are like extractive ones that are able to pay off politicians. But Franz Grenier was at Biz News conference earlier this year, and he said, people keep saying that we need X amount of trillions to rebuild South Africa, assuming there's a new government. Those trillions are already here. Businesses are keeping liquidity around. and not investing it because they can't guarantee a return on investment. They can't guarantee certainty. They can't guarantee anything with those monies. So they're just keeping them and putting them in interest-bearing accounts for people to just save. So if we take that and we want to rebuild South Africa under a government that actually does care about business, the funds are already here.
Yes.
It's super easy to unlock them.
I would tend to agree. And as we come back to saying, the biggest problem with business in Africa is the licensing regimes, it's the regulatory regimes. And as we all know, that a lot of this licensing or the regulations is actually done for the purpose of ideological change. So to conclude, Ramon, Sakhalika does actually give a call to action to all estate agents. And they say, if you are approached by the property regulator for whatever reason, please let them know. Send all information and correspondence to Sakhalika so that they can collect enough evidence to raise the case. Sakhalika say that any form of litigation on politically sensitive issues is difficult because you can't guarantee an outcome. However, and I quote, Sakhalika says, they will never accept a BEE licensed economy, and neither should you.